quiet, so I'll wish you a good morning. I'm not welcoming you to Sheffield, that's not my job, but it is my job to welcome you to the conference this morning. Great turnout. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'm Tim Allison, Director of Public Health in the East Riding of Yorkshire. My role at the moment is rather mundane, just to run through some of the housekeeping issues before moving on to the more other people to do the more exciting things. First of all, fire alarms. No fire alarm tests expected. If there is an intermittent fire alarm, then that suggests a fire in another building, so you need to be aware of that, but no evacuations needed. If there is a continuous alarm, then that does mean a fire, so you need to leave the building following the green signs, which are all around. And the fire assembly point is a paved area on Arundel Gate in front of the adjacent Stoddart building. Toilets, two sets of toilets, which hope people have found. If you haven't found them, there's one set over there and one on the other side of the cafe on the ground floor. And also there are toilets on all the different floors, so if there are queues you might want to try another floor. Just around coffee breaks, please note the coffee breaks are pretty short, and given we've got quite a lot of people, that'll squeeze the time as well. If you can, try and be as quick as possible, but the good news is that you can take drinks into the breakout room. And I don't think you've probably seen that filming is taking place at the moment. And there'll be a bit of collection of shots and sort of talking heads during the day. But don't feel clearly we'd be very grateful if you're happy to be filmed, but please don't feel obliged to be filmed, and if you don't want to, just decline. We've got a fairly, as I mentioned about the coffee breaks, a fairly tight time scale for today. Just run through the programme. So we were hoping that speakers can keep to time. In the plenary sessions, we've got yellow and red cards to warn people, but the parallel sessions won't. So just for all those who are presenters in the parallel sessions, and for the people within the room, we'll try to keep to time. But please do your best. I do have to note a couple of changes on the programme. Excuse me. The first change is that sadly Councillor Jackie Drayton isn't able to be here to welcome everybody to this wonderful city, but we have an excellent replacement in the shape of the city's illustrious Director of Public Health, Greg Fell. Sadly, although I suspect it may not come as a huge surprise, that sadly Dan Jarvis is unable to attend. I'm not entirely sure what other things drag him away today, but I'm sure he's got some good reasons for not being here. But we're delighted to welcome in his place Richard Stubbs. A few other just housekeeping matters. Just run through the end of the programme. There's been very considerable enthusiasm to make sure that everybody is aware of the practice and research collaboration. There are leaflets about it which have been put on the desks. There is a save the date down as the 21st of June, and if you want further If you want further information today, you've got the opportunity to talk to Annette Hayward, Chris Sharp and Lydia Goider. Oh, yeah, under that. Yeah, so spread around in the room. So please contact one of them if you want further information. Lunchtime activities you will be hopefully aware of. Clearly, people want to stay here and look at the posters or network or whatever. That's fine. But there are two activities as a first for this conference. There is the TB meeting, which I think Renner is that. Yes, Renner is leading on, and I think you can take your lunch there. Is that right? Yeah. And there is also, I was going to say a cholera walk, but I think it probably sounds better, a walk to the cholera monument, leaving at the Charles Street exit opposite the reception desk at 1:15. So it's just an informal, unofficial walk if you want to go and have, essentially going out for a walk, but happening to have a public health theme. A couple of other last things. You'll have seen the posters, and as I came on the train, I had somebody else's poster with me, but you could tell people coming to the conference about the number of tubes that people were carrying. So. There were lots of really good posters, always lots of good posters, but particularly this year, really good posters. We would encourage people to vote. So in the pack of information that you've got, there were the arrangements, there's a web address and a QR code, depending which you want to use, but please vote for your favourite posters. There is a prize. I actually have the prize with me, so I don't want to take this home, I want to give it to the person who's done the best poster. So please vote. The more people who vote, the better judgment that we'll get. And finally, please do tweet if you feel that you want to. So the hashtag is YHSLI 2019. So do please tweet around what you think of the conference and good messages to spread out. So I will introduce the speakers in a minute, but before I do, over to Greg.
Thank you. The astute of you will clearly all have already noticed that I'm not Councillor Drayton. She's sadly had to go to a family funeral, so will be in Liverpool, I think she is today. She had sent her cabinet assistant, Councillor Thorndale, but I can't see her, so I'll have to do the welcome to Sheffield today. So I have to put up with me droning on for a minute or two. I hastily scribbled some notes. Welcome to Sheffield, the sunniest city in Yorkshire. It's always like this, always. I guarantee you it's always like this. So all of you that live in the rainier parts, Sheffield, it's fabulous here. It's a fairly big city. I think it's the perfect sized city for a number of reasons. Not too big, not too small. Most importantly, it's 1% of the England population. So for the mathematicians among you, just take 2 noughts off or add 2 noughts on. Even thickos like me can do that. I have some very clever number crunchers, but it's a fabulous city. It's the home still of the steel industry, significant home to the steel industry, despite some losses of jobs over the last 20 or 30 years. It's still home to the snooker, and it's one of the things that we'll fight to the death about to keep the snooker. One of the things that the leader of the council often says is if anyone tries to take the snooker away from Sheffield, she will see to it personally that they are nobbled. And I think she's dead right. I've been over to the snooker for as long as I can remember, and I can remember a long time, and long may that remain. It's an outdoor city. We trade, and you've seen it's sunny, so clearly we're always outdoors. We trade on the outdoors. You'll have clocked that we're very close proximity to the Peak District. So from the centre of town, I can be in the Peak District in about 9 minutes. Probably about half an hour on my bike, 'cause it's a really steep hill to get up. But if I'm in the car, it's about 9 minutes to the Peak District. The Peak District is fabulous, and we trade on that. We're an outdoor city, we make a big play, and it's a big economic draw actually for the city to be an outdoor city. We run Cliffhanger and all sorts of other events. So we make a play on that, quite rightly, and we're proud of it. Sheffield's home to some of the most affluent wards in the city. Have a wander around Dore and Topley and Fulwood, and you'll see what I mean. They're quite posh. It is, like all of our cities, it's a divided city, and there are some less posh parts. We do have some of the most affluent wards and some of the most deprived wards in the country. As I say, it's a city of perfect size. It's a fabulous place to do public health, and hopefully you'll get a flavour of some of that from some of the posters today, some of the presentations, but you get a flavour of all of the stuff that goes on in Yorkshire around public health. So have a great day. I'm sure you will have a great day. It's a fabulous programme. As Tim mentioned, the Cholera Monument Walk, it's about a mile, probably less than a mile from here actually, and it was built in 1832. It was rebuilt in 2006, and it's a monument to the 420 odd people that lost their lives in the cholera epidemic in Sheffield in 1842. And someone will remember that number and tell me I'm wrong later, but I think that's the right number. So have a fabulous day.
Thanks very much, Greg. Now I'd like to welcome Joe, Vivi and Nick Cavell. They're doing a bit of a double act. I think Joe's starting, and then Nick, and then Joe again. So Joe is Director of Health at the Health Foundation, responsible for developing and leading the Foundation's Healthy Lives strategy. And Nick is Director of Cavell Associates Limited, Research Associate at the University of Oxford, BHF Health Promotion Research Group, and Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Sheffield. If you want to find out more about them, the biographies are in the pack. But over to Joe.
So, hi, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to start actually with a question, which is how many people in the room are familiar with the work that the Health Foundation is doing on our Healthy Life strategy? I'm just curious to see a show of hands. Okay, that's great. I would say it's probably less than half of the room. This is me collecting data. We've been working, Health Foundation is about 20 years old. Most of our work to date has been focusing on improvement in the NHS, patient safety, patient experience, efficiency and so on. And only recently have we started to move into this wider agenda around asking the question of what keeps us healthy rather than how do we treat illness when it arises. So it's interesting to see how many of you have come across our work, and hopefully I'm back doing something like this next year here or elsewhere. There'll be more hands going up. I'll start by saying it is a real pleasure to be here. The reason why is because, as I say, the Health Foundation, our overall mission is to improve health for people in the UK. And although we have had this predominant focus up until now on the NHS and essentially how we treat illness, we're now having a shift towards more focus on what supports people to stay healthy. And clearly the role of public health, and particularly public health as it's situated in local government, is really critical to this question. And we see public health as increasingly our sort of primary audience in terms of the work that we're doing. And at the end of this time, I'll just recap on some of those things. But what we want to do this morning, Nick and I, is first of all, I'm going to start with sharing some of the evidence sort of underlying why public health is so pivotal to a healthy population and why the opportunities that public health have by being situated in local government is central to this. And then Nick's going to share some of the practical work that he has been doing with public health teams locally in terms of thinking about how they maximise their impact in the system. So, I'm going to start with framing really what I think probably is increasingly being recognised as the biggest challenge that we're facing, which is that health inequalities are widening. And I know you're an expert audience, so you'll be familiar with seeing these sorts of charts that highlight the difference between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy for people depending on whether or not they're living in the most advantaged 10% of the population or the population that face least advantage. Slightly different take on this is a chart that we produced a couple of weeks ago now, when we launched the work that the Health Foundation is doing with Michael Marmot. So next year will be 10 years on from Michael Marmot's Fair Society Health and Lives report, and we're working with Michael and his team at the Institute for Health Equity to do a sort of 10-year review of what's been happening with health inequalities in that time. And one of the things some of my colleagues did was look at, if we talk about this this life expectancy gap, but what does that, what's another way of thinking about this? And what this shows is the total life years lost to a child born today, whether they're living in most advantaged or the least advantaged conditions. And the red roundels that you see on this chart tell you what the proportion of children are in that decile. So clearly, actually, that isn't evenly distributed. There are slightly more children living at the sort of more deprived ends of the spectrum. But what you can see here is this very, very stark fact that actually children being born into the bottom 40% or so are disproportionately facing more life years lost than children who are being born into other sections of our society. So this is a big concern, and it has implications not just for those individuals, but it has implications for us as a society, particularly one where we're going to be increasingly dependent on having a sort of healthy future population to support economic and social prosperity. There's another chart actually I'm just showing, which I just think there's something interesting as well. We need to remember that actually there are other factors driving inequalities, and what this is showing us is that if you're not white in our society, you're more likely to be in the 10% of the population that faces greatest deprivation. So there are other structural inequalities that are underlying this that we shouldn't ignore. But I think there's a really kind of potentially hopeful message here. It doesn't have to be like this. And again, I know you're an expert audience, and so I'm sure you're familiar with this paper that Ben Barr published in BMJ middle of 2017, which was an analysis of the English health inequality strategy that took place under the new Labour government between 1997 and 2010. But I'm just going to highlight what I think are some really important messages in this paper. Really, I kind of think this is something that all of us should be carrying around, because I think this is really telling us this, things don't have to be how they are. So the intervention that was being evaluated was a cross-government strategy, and I think this is a really important point that again speaks to the role public health has in local government. What the paper tells us is that before the strategy, the gap in male and female life expectancy between the most deprived local authorities in England and the rest of the country was increasing at a rate of 0.57 months a year. So again, this is a familiar pattern now, seeing increases in the gap in life expectancy. However, during the period that the strategy was implemented, there was a reduction in the gap in life expectancy. It started to reduce by 0.91 months each year for men and 0.5 for women. And overall, by the end of the period, the gap in male life expectancy was 1.2 years smaller, and females 0.6 years smaller. So, I mean, what this is telling us is that, growing health inequalities is not inevitable. It is possible to change this. And the strategy really encompassed things that will be very familiar to all of the work that you do in councils. It was about looking at strategies that were supporting families, like Sure Start, engaging communities and tackling deprivation. There was a shift in the allocation formula, the NHS, so that more deprived communities were getting greater access to care. But importantly, there was also a focus, both at national as well as local government, in terms of addressing some of these social determinants of health through regeneration, minimum wage, reductions in child poverty and other things. So, the conclusions were that a comprehensive strategy targeted at the most deprived areas of the country in a context of that wider cross-government support can reduce health inequalities. So that was the conclusion of the paper. In terms of where we are now, this is quite a busy chart, but I think quite an important chart from the Resolution Foundation, which shows what's happening to household income. So again, this is split by deciles of poorest to richest households in the UK, and it's mapping onto this what's happening with the changes of household income due to sort of tax and welfare changes. And what we can see here is that the poorest households are getting poorer, so building up problems for the future. This is a chart that is showing what's happening with child poverty. It's topical, it's in the news this week, that we're starting to see rising levels of child poverty, starting, not quite, but starting to reach levels that we saw in the early 90s, but the projections suggesting that if things aren't done, this will start to exceed that. And we know, if we look at things like child obesity, we know that actually where you are on that socio-economic gradient does actually have direct impact on risk factors and therefore your likely life chances. So, having said all that, which is all quite bleak, I think actually there is something interesting happening at the moment. I think there's definitely a growing recognition that we need to be thinking more about prevention. So we had the Department of Health and Social Care put out their prevention vision before Christmas. They're now in the process of doing some work on the prevention green paper at the Health Foundation last week. We held a workshop with people from the Department of Health and Social Care, but what for us felt important was that we actually brought together both public health colleagues, but people who are working on determinants of health across the system. So we had people from Joseph Rowntree and the Child Poverty Action Group. We had people from housing organisations, from planning organisations. So we're really trying to embed this message that we've got to think very broadly if we are wanting to support a healthier population. This week, the ONS on Wednesday, I think it was, put out their life expectancy figures. I thought, despite this being a day where there is obviously quite a lot of other significant news going on, it still actually made it onto most of the main national news programmes. So this is something I think people are starting to pick up on that. And I think also particularly interesting, papers like the Financial Times are writing about this quite extensively. So I think once these issues are starting to get into the psyche of people who actually hold a lot of power and decision making in this country, hopefully people are starting to see this as something that has to be addressed. So this is where I think the role of public health is really important. The Local Government Association published just at the beginning of the year a set of essays. I wrote one, Greg, I know, authored one, that was about looking at the role of public health in local government. And for me, the kind of reflection I was making was, I think this is an idea whose time has come. I think the move to local government probably happened, certainly at a very difficult time in terms of the wider context, but actually now I think there is this more recognition of the importance of the role it has to play. But one of the essays I was going to pick out was written by Eugene Mill, who talked, a nice quote here, "It's lazy thinking to blame social gradients of obesity or smoking on choice or lack of moral fibre amongst the poor and disadvantaged. Behaviours matter, but behaviours are shaped by environments. Environments are shaped by societal choices, and a key channel for these choices is local government." So I think that's a very important statement there in terms of the role for public health and local government. Which then takes me to sort of trying to ground this a little bit more in terms of practically what might that mean, what are the opportunities here. And one of the things that we've been working on as part of our Healthy Lives strategy for the last 2 years now is working with Harry Rutter, who's now at the University of Bath, but has been thinking a lot about how do you build evidence in complex systems. So there's a recognition, I think, that most public health challenges sort of are the emergent property of the systems and conditions that we find ourselves in. And there is sort of people talk about simple, complicated, and complex systems. Simple, the I think the sort of clearest analogy I've had of this is, a simple problem, simple challenges like baking a cake. You can follow the recipe. As long as you follow the recipe, you can pretty much get the same cake every time. Complicated problem is like sending a rocket to the moon, lots of moving parts. Very, very complicated, but again, you can work it out with some precision and you can land a rocket on the moon. A complex problem is like raising a child, so anyone with children will know you think you can do the same things with your children, but they end up very different because there are so many different factors shaping the context in which they're growing up. And as I say, we're very familiar with seeing obesity as a property of a complex system. And although it's helpful to understand it in these terms, because it gives you a sort of more insightful way of thinking about the problem, it also kind of creates quite an overwhelming thing. If this is a complex problem, where do you start? What can you do? And so the work we've been doing with Harry and with Nick, who's now going to share some of the approaches, is first of all saying what we need to do is start understanding that system and start understanding the different sort of moving parts in that through mapping systems. We've been doing, supporting Nick and Harry to be working with various people with the GLA who have been interested in systems mapping on youth violence, with Public Health England who have been interested in systems mapping on young people's mental health. But Nick's now going to talk about some of the work that's been done in this region.
Thank you, Joan. My work, often, I try to drive it towards translating public health into practical applications. I'm that horrible word, pracademic, an academic come practitioner. And that's very much what this mapping work has tried to do, is try to take that messy, complicated business of complex systems that many people kind of get it and are signed up to, but the next question is often, so what? What do we do about it? So what we tried to do is to use the approach of systems mapping to attempt to explore this area and help people to define their roles. This has been tried by many different people. There's work going on at Leeds at the moment. Leeds University working in conjunction with Public Health England on the obesity pilots. There's lots of work being done on this in Australia. So we're one of many trying these different approaches. So I just wanted to give you some examples. And the couple of examples I'm going to give you are on physical activity, just because it's a slightly more tangible issue. But as Joe mentioned, we've explored this with youth violence and knife crime, with mental health, with early interventions with young people, and so on. So this was a physical activity project in Derby, and the stakeholders said, we want to take a whole systems approach across our city. And we don't really know what that means. Let's have a look at how we can turn that idea of a whole system approach across the city into reality. So we mapped the system. So this is a causal loop diagram, and what this means is that the things in the circles are the things that we think influence physical activity. The Derby people wanted specifically to focus on different modes of physical activity, so we split out walking, cycling, and sport and active recreation. But really in the middle is the outcome we want physical activity. And then it's just a workshop. It's people saying, well, I think it's really important that the convenience of car travel has influenced how active we are. It's too convenient these days to be active by car in our cities, so that's what we do. So it has a negative relationship with walking for transport. And others might say, bottom left, well, it's about, we want to invest in more cycling infrastructure. And so that becomes a node on the map. And then the sort of interesting bit, from my point of view, is drawing all the lines and the connections between them to see how one thing influences another, how you can have potential feedback mechanisms, and how you can begin to exploit what they call positive feedback loops. So the things that might have a sort of spin-on effect. What can we do across a city or across a system that has a bigger impact than just individual actions? So in this example, we workshopped the map. The black things were the first map. The red circles were the things that were added in the first meeting, things that people thought were important locally. Then we took this back to the group and said, well, what are you doing in your, you want to do a whole system approach, what are you doing? And they said, well, actually, we're mostly doing individual stuff. We've got a website, we've got leaflets, and we've got individual behaviour change programs. That's pretty much where our program is at the moment. And then we said, well, what do you think is important? And they said, that stuff, the environment stuff, building healthy places, addressing parks and open space, looking at perceived traffic danger and so on. And in a way, we were amazed that it took a map and a couple of workshop sessions to get people to think about that. But in qualitative interviews afterwards, the stakeholders from Derby said this was a really important moment for us in actually getting us together, getting us to think across the system, and getting us to realise what we were and weren't doing. And they said, well, if we really are to have a whole systems approach across the whole city, and we need to be thinking about changing social norms and getting people to think differently, we're not doing anything on that. So just putting these nodes and lines out at the very basic level help people to think about what they were and weren't doing. And then this is really busy, but just all this was about data. So we then said, okay, you want to take this whole systems approach, what data do you collect? And they said, well, pretty much the stuff in the middle. We want more physical activity, so we're measuring physical activity. But then, after lots and lots of detailed conversations, we sort of interrogated all these little nodes on the map. So we asked the people from the local authority, is there nowhere in the local authority that measures danger? And they said, oh yeah, there is actually. We've got perceptions of safety data. What about mapping of green space? Oh yeah, we've got GIS mapping of sport data. So it's only really after taking a systems lens across the city and trying to think of all the range of partners that might be involved and interested, and then all the range of data sets that could be and were being collected, that they began to build up a picture that actually they're monitoring loads of different things that might show loads of different trends, positive or negative, that create a whole picture of what's happening across the city. That's the first example. The second was Doncaster, which is very much live. A couple of colleagues from Doncaster in the audience here. A similar thing with a different coloured piece of software. So again, created, but this one we started from scratch, post-it notes and flip charts and all that, to ask people, with stakeholders to say, what's important to you? What do you think makes a difference in Doncaster? And you can see, for example, top left, the way that physical activity in this system is not seen as an individual behaviour change issue. It's situated in the context of poverty and social isolation, and people not having money available for basics, let alone the luxury of being physically active. And it's trying, these sorts of maps are trying to make the connections between those issues and trying to locate a behaviour or an outcome or a public health issue within its broader context. There are some people, I bet half of you are thinking, what a mess. And then the systems people often think, oh, that's really interesting, and they want more connections, they want more nodes. And sometimes it's helpful to zoom in and use these to create some of the detail. But this gets even more messy when we start to map the potential actions. So this we found very useful in Doncaster, asking the stakeholders to say, okay, here's the system, what do you want to do? And all these little squares are things that are in progress right now, or should be done, or should be enhanced in order to move on and to take a systems approach. And so you can see that this becomes a little bit, the risk is this becomes a little bit of a shopping list of individual things that are being done. But if you add them up and if they're coordinated, they can become something towards a systems approach. And then you can see the green things are what colleagues in Doncaster said, well, this is our first priority. This map starts to get us thinking about parks and green space. So let's do some more detailed systems mapping specifically on parks and green space. So here is a map that says, we're now just going to zoom in on what is it that influences people being active in the parks and green space in Doncaster. And we look at the range of issues, whether people appreciate the benefits, whether they even want to be active outdoors, whether there's a demand for community. If we just zoom in a little bit, just to sort of try and think this through, what does this say? So it's clearly important that green space is appealing, is nice. We want to do things, budgets permitting and so on, to improve the appealing nature of green space. And what this map helps us to do is to think through, well, why do we want to do that? We want to do that because we want to directly get more people coming to our parks and green spaces, but we also want parks to look better, so there are more events put on, so that Park Run want to launch an event in your park, so that people have picnics, so that people run their own events, so that you're changing social norms, so that people feel safer, which in turn makes more people come, which in turn leads to green flag awards, which in turn... So you see what I mean? It's the way to sort of try to spin out the potential consequences, particularly the positive ones, and try to build on those and enhance them. And also, I can't really see them on here, but also negative feedback loops. What might be the bad things, the unintended negative consequences of our actions that we want to try to mitigate in some way. So these aren't the answer, these types of maps, but they start to help us take apply a systems lens, help to think through the range of issues that might be applicable, and help us to take a broader perspective. And we did some qualitative interviews, quite formal as part of a research project in Derby, but also in terms of evaluation of some of these events. This is what people say. It can help people see the bigger picture. Sometimes that can be a bit overwhelming, particularly with some of the maps there's almost too much detail, but people appreciate that it helps them to see the whole system. But for people who have a specific task or role or set of actions, they often say they like to see their role in the system. Oh, I see, that's me. So I'm this little circle here that says tree planting. Great, I know what I do now, I know how it connects to things. As you saw with the complicated one, it helps to plan the programme, so you can start to say, let's do this here and let's do that there. And one of the strongest things we found from nearly every topic we've used this technique in is the process. It's bringing people, the old thing really, bringing people together, getting them to share a vision and getting them to talk about a common challenge. And we found the mapping very helpful to do that. We could probably use something else. We could probably use some other stimulus to discussion, but the process itself has been extremely valuable. And bottom right, I'm not just being cynical, people find these pictures appealing and useful and helpful to get them thinking. What have we found challenging? The real systems analysts, the systems scientists, the people who do systems modelling, think this is Mickey Mouse. It's not proper systems mapping. We're not properly exploring the feedback loops. We're not really looking at the dynamic elements of the system. I think those are all valid criticisms, but what we're trying to do is the practical end of mapping in order to help people plan action. Many people find that it's too complicated. As I said a couple of times, it's a bit overwhelming. And then, bottom right, often people want the silver bullet. We have software that produces a lovely map, and they say, is there not a button you can push that lights up where we should? Yeah, there's not. We still need to think this through. So we've just found that this approach has helped to apply a practical application of systems theory, and has helped people to think through their programs in a slightly different way. And it's probably just one of many techniques that can be used, but we found it pretty helpful.
So I'm just going to finish off with just sharing some other work that's being done by an organisation called the Amidia Foundation, a US-based foundation. They're actually the foundation, their funding comes from eBay, and they have a series of foundations that work on social issues across the US. And they're very interested in systems approaches, and I saw a presentation from one of their team a couple of weeks ago, which I think was very helpful in starting to show how do you kind of move into action. So I was just going to show a slide that I've adapted from that. So when people talk about complex systems, they often kind of use this iceberg analogy. So they talk about, we see a bit above the water, we see that kind of crisis point. So it might be, rough sleepers, or it might be increasing presentations of young people at A&E for mental health problems, whatever. And we're seeing that bit at the top, and often we respond to the bit at the top and don't think enough about what's underneath. And I guess what we're saying these complex system maps can do is help you understand what's underneath. But you still have this problem of how do you respond to it, and the way in which the Amidia Foundation is starting to categorise that is by talking about there's the urgent need, there's the localised problem. So as I say, for homelessness, it could be numbers of rough sleepers are rising. But actually, underneath that, there's a widespread need of sort of people who are facing problems that maybe aren't actually manifesting themselves yet. So in the homelessness area, it might be around numbers of short-term tenancies, it might be people with increasingly precarious finances, rising mental health problems, and people not able to kind of maintain control over their life. It might be things around family breakdown, a whole mix of things that are all there underneath the surface, not quite translating into people being homeless, but nevertheless are there. And they split those into things that represent structural failures, so things that are going wrong in services, sort of the concrete parts of our system, but also things that are maybe about some of the complex dynamics, the behaviours, the beliefs, some of these sort of underlying value systems and so on that are there. And then they talk about systemic failure, which is really when you just have a multiple of these different systems breaking down. So if we go back to, zoom back out to health inequalities, what we've arguably got at the moment is a whole series of complex dynamics that are working in the wrong direction, creating a systemic failure that we see in terms of this increasing gap in life expectancy. And so they say, well, you know, it's fine, work on all these levels, you know, don't feel overwhelmed. So everything's needed. So, you know, if we have an urgent need, you have to provide relief. You have to work on that. You have to increase emergency accommodation, for instance. Where there are structural failures, focus on the service innovation that you can do. They're tangible, you can define them. When it comes to some of the complex dynamics, you need to be thinking about more broader systems innovation. So whereas the structural problems around homelessness might be around helping people manage debt or family support, some of the systems challenges might be about having to address a no-pay economy and so on. And at the systemic failure level, they talk about the need for a system transformation, which I kind of always feel is a little bit hard to describe, so I'm going to put it on the slide. But I think this really starts to say that actually the first step is understand the system, and then the second step is start to chunk up the different interventions you can take at different points in that system to have impact. So in conclusion then, I think it feels to me that history is repeating itself. We're going back to a time where health inequalities are increasing. We've got a real opportunity in terms of the public health system and the position that they have in local government and the influence they can exercise there across the wider system. I think we do start to have some real practical tools that all of you hopefully can be using in thinking about some of the challenges that you're working on. And it feels to me it's really important that public health thinks about how do you reveal the whole system and make it visible to people? How do you bring forward evidence? You've got a real reputation as an evidence-based sector. It's really important to bring forward the evidence. How can you guide people to taking appropriate interventions and particularly starting to join the dots across the different things that are happening and advocate for change? So thank you very much. And this is our website, and hopefully if you go there you'll find other materials that will be of use.
So thank you very much, Joe and Nick, for the great presentation. We will have a, albeit brief, Q&A session just before the coffee break. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Richard Stubbs. Richard leads the Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Network, an organisation that connects NHS, academia and industry to facilitate change across the whole health and social care economy, with a focus on increasing economic growth and improving outcomes for patients. And prior to this, Richard was the Academic Health Science Network's Commercial Director, providing executive leadership on all commercial, innovation and wealth creation objectives.
Thank you, whatever all that means. Good morning everyone, my name is Richard Stubbs. As you heard, I'm Chief Executive of the Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Network. But I'm also here today on behalf of Dan Jarvis, who does send his sincere apologies, as we said at the top. I suppose we can forgive him. I did offer to swap places because I think walking through a lobby is a lot easier than coming and talking to an expert audience, but I'm here, so I didn't win that argument. So Dan does send his apologies. It's always very hard, I think, to step in for somebody else on a presentation because you feel like a really bad cover band. So I've shamelessly taken a bit of what Dan wanted to say, but also added a bit around the Academic Health Science Network as well. And just talk, because there are some crossovers which I hope you will see. So I'm going to have a bit of a split presentation, talk with both my hats if I can. And then almost certainly have a big argument with Greg about the cost of innovation in health, I'm sure, at the end. Yeah, just teeing you up for that one, Greg. I'm also a board member of the Sheffield City Region Local Enterprise Partnership, the LEP. I'm sure you've all heard of LEP. Has anyone heard of the Academic Health Science Network? Some hands. Oh, that's not too bad. I won't actually know what we do, but that's good. So, we heard a lot actually in the previous presentation about, I suppose, the social and economic impact of good health. I think we would absolutely agree with that, both from an ASM point of view, but also from a LEP point of view. We did some interesting work early this year with the Northern Health Science Alliance, which is kind of a sister organisation of ours, on the relationship between health and wealth, and understandably, as you'd imagine, very clearly shows that health equals wealth equals health again, and we do believe in trying to forge that virtuous circle. There's very much a north versus south piece to this as well. So some of the things I think which were quite interesting was the productivity gap between the north versus the south, but also aspects around the fact that if you are ill in the north, you are 39% more likely to lose your job than in the rest of England, which I think is quite interesting. But if you do return to work, your wages are 66% lower. So there is a phenomenal, I think, business case for the north to really understand the link between our health and our wealth and how both feed the other. From an academic health science network point of view, we are interested, as interested in creating and sustaining jobs across our region as we are in changing patient pathways and using innovation to improve patient health. So we're in both spaces at once, and we very clearly see the connection between the two. Sheffield City Region, gradually done the big clarion call, Sheffield's brave, we all know that. It's this sunny all the time, but equally, there's quite a lot, I think, to Sheffield City Region, which we probably don't do as good a job as we should shout about. As Sheffield City Region Local Enterprise Partnership and also with the Combined Authority, we're incredibly ambitious about delivering an extra 70,000 jobs to the region over the next 10 years. We also want to have an increase of 50% growth in our local startups over the next 25 years, 50% growth in investment in R&D over the next 25 years, 30% growth in the sexual workforce that we class as highly skilled in the next 25 years. So we're very much on a jobs push, a quality of jobs push, and we see that as absolutely symbiotic with increasing population health as a result. In fact, one of the reasons why I personally joined the LEP a couple of years ago now was to try and strengthen the health impact of economic decisions made and start to put that argument in the room. And as I say, we think we've got a lot going for us actually. And there's something I think about this particular region, this south of the patch as far as Yorkshire is concerned, in terms of trying to find out the synergy between some of the fantastic assets we've got. I think increasingly, Sheffield City Region, we're marketing ourselves as the wellness, the prevention centre of excellence, the Advanced Wellness Research Centre, which, depending on how you came into the city this morning, some of you will have seen it being built in Attica. It's going to be a phenomenal asset for us as it opens later on this year, but it's also joined by the university sector, two fantastic universities here, and elements such as the mix, the medtech and in vitro diagnostic cooperatives. We have two of those in Sheffield, there's a further two in Leeds as well. There's only 8 mix in the country, we've got 4 of them in Yorkshire and Humber. There's a real asset base here. We've also got, as you can see here, more medtech companies in Sheffield City Region alone than Oxford. Actually, if you look at Yorkshire as a whole, we have more medtech companies across Yorkshire and Humber than Oxford and Cambridge combined. And yet, we're not getting the associated investment, I think, particularly with investment from international, as we ought to. So there's something about marketing ourselves more, but also about understanding that link between jobs and between health. Dan would want me to say that he's incredibly keen on active travel. And if you are picking up any of our social media or any announcements from Combined Authority, from Dan's office, you'll see that we're about to appoint an active travel commissioner. We're looking very hard about what the city region can do to support choices, population choices about how we travel to work. Lots of Twitter pictures of Dan riding around with a bike this week. But we're also looking at approaching ourselves overseas as well. So, the AHSN. So I won't ask anyone to tell me what we do, but for those of you who didn't put your hand up, as I said, we're interested in improving health. We exist in Yorkshire and Humber to support the NHS to drive the adoption of innovation further and faster. We can't do that by adding costs to the system, so we have to come up with innovations or evaluate innovations that are going to release costs from the system. And as I said before, we're just as interested in using those initiatives to create and sustain jobs, preferably in our region, but I'll take the UK, to be honest. And we're part of a national network, so there's 15 AHSNs across the country. Yorkshire, you won't be surprised to know, is the biggest. It's an interesting patch to work on, obviously, as I'm sure colleagues in the room will know very well. But you will know that we've got more people here than Scotland. You'll know that we're bigger than Belgium, bigger than many European countries. We've got twice the economic output of Wales. There's a £12 billion health and social care system in Yorkshire. So, as a network, it's an interesting geography to serve. And we do quite a lot. So, over the last 5 years, we've brought in £330 million worth of funding. We've created well over 500 jobs now. That's vastly out of date. But we've also benefited around 22 million patients with our innovations. So what do we do? Well, in short, anything that drives innovation to frontline use. We are commissioned by NHS England NHS Improvement Office for Life Sciences, which is a government department which sits between the Department for Health and Social Care and the Department for Business, Enterprise and Skills. And we work on a patient safety agenda. We work on national programmes that look to shift the needle, as NHS England would say, across the entire country. And we try and work on the most challenging aspects that the NHS struggles with today. So every single academic health science network works on these 7 programmes. I won't go into detail. You can have all these slides, obviously, but what I'd urge you to do, if you are interested, is we have something called the AHSN Atlas, which is our online encyclopedia to go drill down into the case studies behind all these programmes. But none of them are rocket science. A lot of them are innovations that have been around for 10, 20 years. We're not really interested in discovery. We're interested in spread. So actually it's about taking what we know works already. It just doesn't happen to work everywhere. And our job is to try and make it work everywhere. We have a patient safety collaborative based in Bradford but working across all of Yorkshire. And the patient safety collaborative, as you can see, focuses on deterioration, maternity and neonatal medicine safety, spread and adoption, increasing the quality improvement capabilities and capacity of Yorkshire and Humber. We spend a lot of time training our frontline staff in quality improvement techniques and to enable them to sustain the changes that we're helping them to make. And interestingly, we work with companies. So we do an awful lot of work with the innovators. In many ways, our job is quite cultural. It's about trying to shorten that gap between the NHS and the industry conversation. It's about trying to find real strategic partnerships that aren't transactional. But it's also about getting innovators to have a better value proposition for our NHS, to understand our needs more. I think that's particularly important. We're pretty poor at broadcasting our needs. Industry often are quite proactive in coming with problems in need of solutions, and we're trying to reverse that trend. But we work with them on all aspects throughout what we call the innovation pathway, from assessing the value proposition to getting them in front of commissioners and providers. We stop short of being part of their extended sales team. But what I'm very fond of saying is I really believe in the outcomes or the outputs that an innovation can bring. So I've got no problem at all with marching an industry colleague into a CCG and saying the outcomes of this particular product are something that you need to talk about. If a competitor came around the corner a week later, I'd shamelessly push this person out of the door and bring in somebody who's better, faster, cheaper. So we're quite flirtatious, but the companies do know that. And we also work very locally. So across Yorkshire and Humber, as you'll know, 3 sustainability and transformation partnerships, 2 of which are integrated care systems, one of which I'm sat in today. they commission us as well to look at very bespoke local needs, a lot of which are around population health programmes. So what do we do locally? We are knee-deep in our digital care record, so the local health and care record exemplar programmes, of which Yorkshire Humber is one of them across the country, joining up all our data, joining up the health record, secondary care, primary care, social care, health records, coming out of what starts off as the legal care and now expanding across Yorkshire Humber, allowing us to have a much better understanding of both the care that we're giving to individual patients, but also the data that tells us about our bigger, wider health needs and how we can commission better services, give them that information for the future. We're working with West Yorkshire Harrogate, integrated care system on housing, particular interest of mine. We're very much looking at the social determinants of health. We're trying to shift the focus from the frontline NHS to start looking at social determinants of health. And this housing project for us is a way of starting to map the potential interventions in housing from housing providers, starting to look at how you can shift upstream on some of this work. We're looking at various things in South and Bassingbourn around population health. And in Humber Cross and Vale, we're working on a very interesting digital smoking cessation app, which is based on CBT, but starting to be integrated. It's starting to be integrated into their existing smoking cessation services. There is an awful lot more that we do, but I'm going to stop there. And as I say, if you do want to talk more about the specific work of the HSN, check our website out, look at the atlas. I'm happy, obviously, to talk for the Q&A. So, in conclusion, because I know I want to have time for Q&A with Nick and Joe. Health equals wealth equals health. The North has a particular challenge to solve in terms of that productivity gap. We have to be incredibly mindful of the inequality in terms of health outcomes, what a loss of job does for somebody in the North compared to somebody in the South. And for us at the HSN, it's about how do we not just improve the care we're delivering today, but how do we use innovation to transform our relationship with health, not just healthcare, for the future. Thank you very much.